Lyndon has 30 years of experience in diamonds. He has an MSc in geology, oceanography, and started his career at De Beers as an exploration geologist. During the next 15 years, he was operations manager or COO of various public and private companies mining alluvial diamonds, mainly along the Middle Orange River. About 10 years ago, he started up his own alluvial mining venture and is currently co-owner and CEO of 3 private diamond mining operations on the lower Orange River, on the lower Vaal and Middle Orange River. I also want to say that Lyndon is also part of my organization, and being who I am, past my sell-by date, he's one of my crutches, having to move forward from time to time. Then secondly, also in the session, my dear friend, Dr. John Bristow, BSc Honours, MSc Geology, PhD Geochemistry, postdoctorate, University of New Mexico, tourism diploma. John has 40 years in geological research, minerals exploration, project development, mining, manufacturing, and marketing, primarily in the diamond sector, with extensive local, African, and international experience. He has successfully created and operated private and listed junior exploration and mining ventures with related executive and directorship roles. The only way I can compete with John is in terms of the years of experience. I think I'm standing on 44 years now. So be that as it may, our third participant presenter here is also a lady that I came to know over a number of years, Sanazo Dlakavu. Sanazo completed a BSc Geology at Rhodes and an MSc at Nelson Mandela University, African Earth Observatory Network, Institute studying groundwater samples extracted from boreholes in the southern Karoo as part of a regional shale gas research program. And she undertook and completed a detailed field investigation and comprehensive report on the small and junior diamond sector from late 2018 till early 2021. And that is also during that period that I got to know her personally, and we traveled extensively over in the country. So welcome to all of you, and with not much further ado, over to Lyndon.
Thank you, Gert. I'm going to start off with, for the benefit of the students, just a short overview of South African diamond production. South Africa produced about 8 million carats per year, worth around 20 billion rand, of which the alluvial production is about 350,000 carats, about 4.5%, worth approximately 5 billion rand. And there you can already see the value of our alluvial production, our specialties, about 25% of the total value of diamonds produced. There's still large volumes of alluvial deposits in South Africa available, as I'm trying to show you today. And most of these are mined by small private companies. I think, I might be talking under correction, I think there's only one small alluvial listed company left. I think they're mining Krone and Indora near Venetia. But these mining companies are very crucial to the economies of the small towns in the Northern Cape and the Northwest, where they provide crucial jobs. But because of the low grades that we are mining, this industry is very susceptible to overregulation. And it is the highest risk commodity in the world to mine, as I'm going to show you today. In terms of production, over the years, you see we had a height of production in 2005, about 15.6 million carats. And then after the financial crash in 2007, 2008, it dropped significantly. And it also shows you how difficult it is to start up again once you had to close some operations down. Many of them aren't worth starting up again, or too costly to start up again. In terms of value per carat, where do we sit as South Africa? You can see at the top, Lesotho, and we heard last week, Letsing sitting at around about $1,900 a carat, very, very special for kimberlite. But on average, Lesotho about $540 a carat. South Africa average about 113, and this is 2020 data. And John mentioned this morning that he had statistics that shows that the average value in 2020 was about $86. Be it as it may, but it is still very low compared to the next slide, which I'm going to show, which shows the average price per carat of the alluvial production in South Africa. And there you can see Ventersdorp area, northwest province that Pierre was talking about $900 a carat, 1,200 probably. And then the Orange River, the Middle Orange River and the Vaal River, up to $6,000 a carat. I mean, that's very special. It's nearly double anything else in the world that you can compare it with. So we really have a very unique deposit on the Middle Orange River that is being mined by, I think, quite unusual group of operators. The world average, like I said, is about $150. Now, this graph shows what has happened to the small operators, the juniors in the alluvial sector over the years, and mainly due to over-regulation and the cost of compliance to regulations. The first study was done by Farrell in 2012, which shows that the number of operators, operating companies, decreased from around 2,000 to around 170 in 2012. Now, Senazo's study that she completed last year showed that there's about 220 companies left, but her study also includes the small operators on the West Coast, which Farrell's study did not include. So the situation is not improving. Okay, let's start setting the scene for what happened in our alluvial setup. Now, for the Middle Orange River and the Lower Vaal, the scene was actually set more than 300 million years ago, as Pierre also explained about the Dlakavu glaciers and the Cargonian highlands, where the glaciers moved down. This figure shows, you can see the outline of the two continents, of the country South America and South Africa at that time. And you had glaciers moving across and picking up a whole lot of material, and eventually dumping it into what you call the Karoo Sea, and that led to also to the deposition of the Karoo sediments on top of that. But we're seeing more and more that the scene was actually set before then by the pre-Karoo topography. And as we are exhuming the pre-Karoo topography, those features actually had a significant impact on the gravels that we are mining today. If you look at about 130 million years ago, when Gondwana land started to break up, it of course also coincided with a major period of kimberlite emplacement. And when the continent started to split up, Southern Africa suddenly had a coastline, and you started to strip this Karoo sediments, this hundreds of meters of Karoo sediments that you had deposited started to be stripped away. And if you just look at this as a cross section, at that time you had the Karoo sediments at the top, and the Dlakavu at the bottom, and then underneath this you had the Ventersdorp lava floor that probably had a significant drainage pattern developed on top of it that we are starting to see being exhumed today. And then of course you had the kimberlites coming up and the erosion afterwards. So just looking at what the kimberlites, ages of kimberlites, and Pierre also shown that you had a significant number around 80 to 120 million years, and then you had a couple of the older ones that Pierre indicated. So today, this is what the cross section through the country basically looks like. You've got the Lesotho Islands. You still have hundreds of meters of Karoo sediments. And then through erosion, you're now starting to get pieces of the Dlakavu starting to stick out on the edges. And if you look as a plan view of the country, you can see this is where the Dlakavu is starting to stick out. And most of our alluvial deposits today actually occur on top of Dlakavu bedrock. And this is quite significant. Now, if you look at when Gondwana land broke up and at the lower Cretaceous stage, that's what Gert was referring to earlier. You probably had one drainage coming from the top, the Kalahari River, that entered the coast probably roughly where the current Orange River mouth is. And you had a second river draining the hinterland, entering the sea roughly where the Olifants River mouth is today. And through uplift in the north, this river eventually captured the Kalahari River to establish the drainage patterns that we have today. Most of the alluvials that we find today are associated with the current rivers. You don't really have much left of the older gravel deposits. They've all been eroded away. So if you look at what's required to trap and concentrate diamonds in a fluvial system, well, first of all, you need class. Before you eroded the Dlakavu, most of the rivers were flowing mainly on Karoo sediments, and you were just flushing everything down to the coast. There was nothing to trap the diamonds on the land. What you need is bedrock features. You need scours and irregularities and resistant bedrock types to keep the diamonds back. Diamonds are concentrated when you have turbulence and changes in fluvial energy, changes in the bed load density, examples of which I'm going to show you a bit later. But to keep them there, you need to concentrate them in very specific areas, because the whole system is a continuous flushing of sediments down to the coast. So you need very special and strong bedrock features to keep your diamonds back. Just looking quickly at the ages of deposits. We know there's diamonds in the Wits Gold. Maura Mutta is probably the oldest other deposit that we know of, between 70 and 80 million years. And then you have the Northwest gravels that Pierre talked about, between 70 and recent. And then the Orange and Vaal River terraces that I'm going to talk about today, probably range in age from about 35 million years to present. And these are left behind as terrace remnants. As river cuts down, it leaves pieces of itself behind. And these are the terraces that we mine. This is the typical ranges of elevations that we are mining at present. Just a bit of classification and general description so that you know what I'm talking about. When I mentioned it, there's three main gravel types that we talk about when we mine. They're mainly called Rooikoppie gravels, middlings, and basal gravel. Now, if you look at a photograph of what I'm talking about, here you can see the basal gravel layer. This is where most of your diamonds would be sitting. This is what our main focus would be when we're mining basals. In the middlings is sort of the channel fill, or as the channel migrates, it leaves sections of it behind in this area. And then you have the Rooikoppie gravels at the top, which is mainly a deflation layer that forms due to the calcretization process of this whole sequence. So the calcrete will destroy your softer, your less siliceous class. And when the calcrete starts to weather, it will leave this deflated layer on top. Now, this layer often represents 3 or 4, maybe even more meters of basal or middlings that gets concentrated into this thin layer. Now, this is what it would look like at surface. Now, this was mined by the old people many years ago, 50, 60 years ago. They all thought that these solution cavities or macondos in the calcrete was pothole features, so they targeted them. But it was easy mining for them because there was no stripping. And there you can see the class are mainly banded ironstone, quartz, and of course diamonds. And that's all that's left when the calcrete starts to weather. Now, this is a photograph of typical basal gravel that we would mine. On the eye, it probably looks very poorly sorted, but hydrodynamically, it's actually very well sorted, because you get your large framework class, and then every pore space gets filled by smaller and smaller little pebbles as the sand gets washed out. So when we see some gravel like this, we get very excited because we know we'll find diamonds in it. We see something like this is what we try to avoid, because we know it's something that's moving, that hasn't settled, that hasn't been trapped or stuck behind a bedrock obstacle, and it will have a very low grade, if any. Now, just a quick note on Drakensberg basalt. This is the last out. This sat on top of the Karoo, of course. Now we know that Drakensberg was quite extensive at one stage. We know it covered Kimberley because we found there's some piece of Drakensberg that was found in the Kimberley pipe. Today in the Orange River gravels, this is about the biggest class that I've ever seen. But if you go to Lesotho, this photograph was taken in the mountains in Lesotho. This is the class of the size of the class still in the rivers up there. So it eroded as it went down the river, but in the Rooikoppie, this gets destroyed. So you don't see this at all. It's quite an important indicator for us if we see it in the basal gravels, because we know then that we're looking at an Orange River source. That's a quick note on processing. When you look at the figures that I present, we process only -38 to +6 millimeter. Now, obviously, the 6 millimeter is not very effective because when it's wet, we can't really desand. We call it desanding. So you'll see some of the photographs will show smaller diamonds than 6 millimeters. It's because they're incidentals that goes through. But in general, we try to remove the -6 millimeter fraction. We found that by removing the -6 millimeter fraction, we lose about probably 60 to 70% of our stones, but only about 5% of our value. But it's about 30 to 35% of our plant feed. So by replacing that with a coarser plant feed, and by removing this fraction in the field, you actually increase the value of the feed that you feed into your plant. Okay, coming to the alluvial deposits. This is a map showing the Orange River, the Vaal River, the Riet River, down to Bristow, and all the kimberlites that occur in this area. Now, if you look at this map and you would think about the alluvial deposits, you think that it will be quite nicely mixed, the values within these rivers should be very similar, but it's not. And the reason being that you have these high ground separating the different river systems. And it also separated the sources of the diamonds between these different rivers, as I'm going to show you. Okay, let's look at the Vaal River. Okay, this is a DTM of the Vaal River. Blue is obviously the deepest spots. The yellows and the brown goes higher and higher. And there you can see the Vaal River exits a gorge. It comes from Warrington. And you have the big riverview splay here at Windsorton. It moves down and you have another big splay here at Waldeck's Plant. And you can see the neck point here as it exits this gorge at Gongo and opens up here. And there's a big deposit that formed here. We're going to look at some of our mining operations on the farm called Riet in this area over here. That's a Hals River coming in from the top. The Vaal River has a couple of high terraces. Riet is one of them, at about between 80 and 130 meters above the current river. The well-known Nooitgedag deposit sits over here. The largest alluvial diamond that was recovered in South Africa came from Nooitgedag, 515, I think it was called, the Penta diamond. And then Holpan over here at about 60 meters, and then the Geduld bench sitting over here also at about 60 meters. Okay, looking at Riet, this area became famous around about the turn of the previous century when the old diggers found a couple of channels or sluits that they called them that were very rich. Now, in that time, up to about 1920, they recovered about 490,000 carats from these sluits, or old channels that they called them, from what they called the bantam layer that was at the bottom of these channels. Now, when I was in De Beers in 1995, we started to look at these things again on Riet. What's interesting here is these big fractures that crosses the river everywhere. And you can see that where they cross the current river, there's sections that the current river also follow these fractures. There's another big one coming down here. And we always thought that this would have probably had a big influence on the Paleo Vaal River. But at that stage, everything here is it's still covered by sand, and it's difficult to see what goes underneath the sand. So when I was with De Beers became under pressure on the farm Riet because people knew that these channels were running into Riet and everybody wanted to go and mine there. So they decided that we should go and have a look and probably mine them out to take the pressure off. So this is what it looked at like at surface. You can see the thick sand cover. There's no evidence of anything underneath. But if you open it up, this was the Droogeveld Sloot number 1 extension onto Riet. This is about a 20-30 meter wide channel, 15 meters deep, going onto the Riet. Quite nice features in the bottom. There were nice potholes and like a waterfall feature. And typical De Beers, the geologists weren't never exactly told what came out of here. I heard afterwards it ran about 4 carats per 100 tons. I'm not sure if it's true. But this thing only extended for about 150 meters onto Riet. And then it climbed out to surface and was eroded away. So a couple of years ago, De Beers sold the prospecting or the mining right on Riet to another company. About 2 years ago, we were offered to go and mine a section there, or get a concession there to go and mine. So we put up a plant there and we started mining. Our concession was fortunate that these long sections that it actually cut across this, what we call the Dikbos fracture. One of these features that we always wondered what it meant. And when we opened it up, we found this. We found some gravel, and this to me is actually the only primary gravel basal gravel that is on Riet. You can see there are a lot of Ventersdorp and dolerite class, and no real, what the old people would describe a bantam lay, a proper basal gravel. The biggest stone that came out here was a 22 carat, and unfortunately we only had a little piece of that in our concession, so we took that out. And currently we're mining on this section over here. Here we're about 60 meters above the current river, and this is what it looks like. It's these weathered fraught Ventersdorp with infills of pebbles into the cracks in the Ventersdorp. No real channel features or anything like you saw on the Dlakavu stoot. And there's another one. You can see these very angular weathered blocks of Ventersdorp, and here and there you get these small channel-like features filled with but it's essentially Riet gravel. It's not a primary gravel anymore. It's a derived gravel, which makes it very difficult to mine. And every now and again you open one of these features. Now you can see the nice glacial striations on the side of this, and the shapes here. You can see it's a glacial channel that was either used by the glacier or carved out by the glacier. And when we found this, we thought, yeah, we've really hit it big now, because you can see the steps. Look at the steps coming down into this feature here. You can see it's polished. It's well rounded. Looks like the river flowed there and actually smoothed it out. But this area was actually a very low grade area for us, and we couldn't really understand it. Look at this pothole feature in here. This is on a concession next to us. And the guys actually went in there with picks and shovels and dug all of this out, and they didn't find a single diamond in it. So what's happening on Riet? I think we had a primary deposit probably close to the post fracture. A lot of that became Riet copy and weathered over time and became a sort of a deflation product. And this deflated gravels weathered down slope towards the current river over time and filled these features that was probably carved by the Dlakavu glaciers. And even these potholes, I mean, I'm not an expert on the Dlakavu, but with the streams in the Dlakavu, be able to cut these potholes into the floor. And I doubt it. I suspect what we're looking at here is probably a pre-Karoo feature or bedrock that the Dlakavu used. And then eventually was filled by the screed coming from the top. We do find that as we go closer to the river, the grade seems to drop and the bigger stones tend to decrease. And this is just a photograph of some of the stones that we found there. Each one of these pages, except the last one, is about a week's production. So we produce about 200 carats a month on Riet. And with these occasional nice bigger stones, that one there was a decolored stone. And obviously the source from most of this would probably be kimberlites. And then you can see the occasional small stones also coming through that we don't that we shouldn't find if our descending was proper, which is not. Average value around about $2,000 a carat. So difficult mining and not a high grade deposit, probably running about 0.25, 0.3 at best carats per 100 tons. But if you do go into those sloots, I mean, obviously that was an area that not concentrated maybe diamonds, but I think it was a big trap site for volume of material to collect in. If you look at the Vaal River going from Smitsdrift, now Riet would be just about round about in this area over here, what we looked at now, and then you go through the Bushman's Kloof, go down to the confluence over here. Not many terraces, there's a geduld bench, and there's a couple of lower terraces sitting in these bends between 20 and 30 meters above the river. Gradient of this river, of this section of the river, and you'll see I'll refer to gradient quite a few times in the presentation. The gradient is quite flat. The river drops about 1 meter every 3.3 kilometers, which is quite flat. If you look at the Riet River, this is the Riet River. This is a diagram of the Helgren. You can see he already identified the pre-Karoo, the pre-Dlakavu Hearts, and the pre-Dlakavu Vaal along all these lines and fracture lines that comes across here. Now the Riet River is famous for the Skitsakama diamond deposit. It sits around about over here. You've got the Modder River and the Riet River coming together at the town called Modderrivier. And just after that, the river goes into a gorge and it exits over here, and it forms a big splay that concentrated diamonds over time. Just once again, the DTM, there you can see the river coming out, and there you can see the splay right at this neck point here, with this gorge, where the river comes out of this gorge. Now, I flew over it about 2 weeks ago, and I took this photograph just for interest's sake. You can see this is Modder River over here, and the confluence sits somewhere over there, and there you can see the gorge, but it's not a straight gorge as you would expect if you think that it was a Karoo cut, or not a Karoo, a Dlakavu cut valley. Now, I'm not sure if the Dlakavu would cut a feature like this that looks like the curves of a river. So I presume, or I suspect, that this might also have been a pre-Karoo feature that the glaciers just utilized and filled up with the tillite. And we know that because we can see the glacial striations right next to the river, current river elevation, which tells you that the river, today's river, haven't really cut in. It's just eroded the Dlakavu out of it. And just a quick graph to show you the elevation change between Modder River and Skitsakama. The gradient's about 1 meter in 500 meters, what the river drops, and then immediately after this point, the river flattens to about half that, about 1 in 1,000 meters. This is just a video of the DTM going down the river from Modderrivier. There you can see you're in the steep-sided gorge. There's no place to exit for the river or to dump its deposit. It's a bed load, so it carries it all out, and there it starts to flatten out. And now you'll see starting the deposits. There you can see the mining activities, and there you can see it's about a 10-kilometer long by 2-kilometer wide, a gravel plume sitting here. It has been continuously reworked, and today's river actually flows in its own alluvial. That's some of the gravels on the Riet River. The Riet River today is a very, very small river. If it's dry, you can nearly jump over it. It's so small. But in those days, it must have been quite a significant river, pumping a lot of water down here to create that, and to concentrate these big boulders. This typical scour feature. These are the things that we're looking for when we're mining. There's some of the stones that come out of this feature. The biggest there is about 81 carat. Some of the diamonds from the Riet River. On the right is the biggest stone that I found there. It's a 172 carat yellow stone. That's a 52 at the front end. Incidentally, these two came out of my concentrate tailings after we had a problem with our X-ray recovery. So you must never be comfortable with your technology. But these stones were cut from that 172. I think they're 236 carats. As you can see, it had a bit of a brown-green tint to it. I think the stone was sold for about $5,000 a carat at that time, a couple of years ago. Now, a while ago, I was fortunate enough to have a look at the Koffiefontein production. And Koffiefontein, of course, lying in the Riet River drainage, right next to the Riet River. Koffiefontein now, average value is probably around about $700 a carat after the increases of the past 2 years. Where the Riet River, the Skitsakama value is about $2,200 a carat. So you've increased the value of the production from $500 or $700 a carat to $2,200 a carat over a distance of about 70 kilometers. And that's what the river system does. It takes out the poor quality stones and destroys them, grounds them up, or breaks them up, and what you get at the end is just a better quality diamonds. Okay, now let's look at the Middle Orange River. First of all, before the confluence, the source of most of the diamonds in the Middle Orange River before the confluence is the kimberlites in Lesotho. There you can see them. Let's see cow, and we had a talk about cow last week, and we saw the special diamonds that comes from there. In Lesotho, this is what the river looks like: deeply incised, fast flowing, not a lot of the place for deposits, so it's flushing all the time. And now, if you come to the Middle Orange River, now this first section is between the Van der Kloof Dam and Hopetown. Now you can see the river has these small gorges and opens up and it closes up and it opens up again. And all of this, and I'm trying to show to you on this left-hand map where I've got the geology underneath the DTMs. And I've cut out some of the elevations on the DTM to show to you what causes these. And here you can see the dolerites in red. As soon as the river hits the dolerite, it narrows, it cuts through, and then it starts to meander again in this area. What you do see here, what you don't see here is a lot of structural activity. There's a couple of lineaments, but no big faults or anything in here. And what this river basically did in this section, it just continuously reworked itself. So there's no real gravel deposits here, except for the one right at the exit of the Van der Kloof Dam, which I'm going to show you now. And then a couple of low elevation deposits between 20 and 30 meters, and they're all covered by agricultural activity, unfortunately. So there's not a lot of things to see or gravel to inspect. But what I have seen is it's mainly small clustered pebble to cobble size. None of the bigger stuff that we see lower down in the river, except here at the exit of the Van der Kloof Dam. There you see these massive boulders. Most of these boulders are dolerite, with occasional dark basalt in between. But it's massive. And we prospected it about 15 years ago, and then thought that the deposit was too small. Somebody else went in there and mined it, and I spoke to them the other day, and they also eventually gave up because the gravel was too coarse. They couldn't mine it. They didn't have the equipment to mine it, and also it got too hard and they had to drill and blast, and they weren't allowed to blast so close to the Van der Kloof Dam. But apparently the biggest stone that came out of here was about 12 carat. Grade wasn't too bad, but eventually they just gave up. They couldn't mine it. Okay, if you look further downstream from Hopetown to the confluence, there you can see the river again enters this gorge. And then when it starts to open up, you start to find some deposits. There at Meillon, there's a deposit, then it goes into another small gorge, and then it opens up completely. Now, looking at the gradients from Van der Kloof to Hopetown, it's about 1 meter, drops 1 meter in about 1,700 meters. And then in this first section of downstream of Hopetown, it drops 1 meter even in every 720 meters into this gorge feature. And then once it exits the gorge, it goes very flat, very similar to the gradient between Smitsdrift and the confluence on the Vaal River, which is quite interesting. And then, of course, it starts to meander, and you get these big deposits formed. Over there, yeah, I'm just trying to show you the size of the deposits. The alluvial deposit that formed after the gorge. Here's the gorge. You can clearly see the gorge. There's two small deposits, Meillon and Riet sitting over here. Goes into another gorge, a little bit of a deposit there. And then as it opens up, the river starts to meander, and it deposits over quite a wide area. If you look at the geology map again, and we look at some of the structural features, we see suddenly now we are starting faults and fault patterns coming through. And it's becoming quite an interesting feature about this section is that as soon as you start finding Venter's drop, and there just after Hopetown, you start find the first bit of Dlakavu sticking out as well. So these faults, and especially the ones crossing, that have probably had some impact on the gradient change that we have here between Hopetown and Klipfontein, halfway to Douglas. Just a quick photograph there. On top of this gorge, there's two deposits called Wicklow and Diamantkopie. You can see the Wicklow pothole, small feature like this. It produced about 4,700 carats. I think it was mined roughly probably in the 60s. But this is the only one that sits outside of the gorge. There you can see this is Diamantkopie, and there's the current river at the moment. Yeah, we're going to look at a deposit called the Kalk. The Kalk, of course, is famous because the first diamond in South Africa was picked up on the Kalk. Just a bit of history. It belonged to a company called BRC Diamond Core about 20 years ago. They drilled it. This is their drill hole that they drilled. They then put up a small plant. They tested it and found it to be uneconomical. We acquired it in 2015, 2014. We took their data and remodeled it, and we saw the following. Once again, this is the DTM of the bedrock. The browns are highs and the blues and the greens are the lows. You can see the channels coming through here. See, there's a nice scour feature, and this is one of the first areas that we decided to mine. The scour contained mainly sand, but the push slope out of the scour had actually a very nice gravel on it. And here you can see this is the diamonds that plotted back that we found in these scours, the pushes out of these scours. And you can see there, when you're on the push slope, the nice grade, but as soon as you move away from it and out of it, the grades dropped dramatically. And eventually I think the drilled resource was about 8 or 9 million tons. We mined about 1.2 million tons of this, and at 0.28 and 0.38 CPHT at about $5,500 a carat, it was quite economical to mine, but the rest of it is very difficult to mine profitably. Just a quick photograph of the deposit. You can see you need big equipment, you need big bulldozers, and you need to open up big quarries, and you need to mine it at big volumes to make it worthwhile. Just on the diamonds from this section of the river between Oaktown and Douglas, were taken out by Manhattan from 2006 till about 2010. These are the typical clipper diamonds that we heard about last week. These big whites. John Ward mentioned last week that Manhattan also got the biggest pink stone, which was an 87 carat, intense pink, amazing stone. Sold for I think 140 million rand in 2010, somewhere there. Now, this is a photograph of an operation that I had on a farm called Markdrift, just upstream from the confluence. Just to give you an indication, this comes from about 80,000 tons of gravel mined and processed. It's about 130 carats. And that's what these deposits are about. It's about these big stones. If you don't find them, that's a 44 carat intense yellow stone. If you don't find these stones, the rest of them don't pay your bills. You've got to find them, and you've got to push the tons to get to them. So it's like I said in the beginning, it's high risk mining, and you got to know what you're doing. You got to know what you're targeting. Okay, let's look at the Orange River post confluence. Now this is the confluence over there. You see these big meanders now starting to develop, which we didn't have as consistently on the Vaal River and on the Orange River pre-confluence. We also have here where the X is, we suddenly have an influx of banded ironstone. Upstream of this X, no banded ironstone in the gravels. Downstream of this X, the river is flooded with banded ironstone. Obviously, this must have had some effect on the river. Now, if we just look at the number of occurrences and the elevations of occurrences on the different sections of the river that I've spoken about so far, you see at Van der Kloof to Hopetown, there's only these low terraces that has developed. Hopetown to Douglas, there's a couple of more that's developed as you go through that gorge. And now suddenly between Douglas and Priska, you have terraces at basically every single elevation, and every couple of months we find another one that we had, but we didn't think would existed. And then the Vaal River between Special, only a couple, and mainly of them on the lower elevations. Now, why is this? Why the sudden change in the number of terraces? Now, if you look at the historical data between Smithsdrift and the confluence, carats produced after Sharp 1976, you can again see that the Orange River after the confluence stands out significantly. So something must have happened that caused this constant concentration of diamonds. Yes, you had the confluence of the two rivers, but even if you add all of this together, you don't come close to the carats that you produce after the confluence. There's two things that stand out. First of all, obviously, there's this influx of banded ironstone. And I think McCarthy postulated that this was a big river system equivalent to the Orange River that came in here. I'm not so sure about that, but there's definitely a big influx coming from this point. But as the river moves closer to the asbestos hills in this area, there must have been a lot of inputs from this side. And we see there's an operation just downstream of Priska, where the gravel is basically flooded with banded ironstone and angular stuff. If you don't look carefully, you don't actually see the rounded stuff in there. So this must have had a significant impact. This probably increased the bed load density of the river, and it probably started to force it to meander more. But that alone is not a reason why you suddenly would find terraces. What I also think you have happening is there's a big fault zone over there, and we see a lot of faulting in this area. And if you go to the next slide, there you can see this big fault right across. And I suspect that you had some reactivation on these fault zones, not specifically this one alone, but probably all over the system, that increase the gradient of the river from time to time, and that forced it to cut down and then probably cut off some of these meanders and left them behind. This is a photograph on a farm called Alluvial, about halfway to Bristow, and there you can see this faulting in the gravel. Now, I've seen this faulting like this in the gravel. I've seen gravel going over faults. I've seen gravel cutting through faults, which tells me that the faulting was active as the rivers were depositing and flowing. So I think that's the main reason why we have this sudden increase in the number of terraces on this section of the river. Okay, let's look at a deposit here. This is a deposit called Kwartelspun that we've been mining for about 3-4 years, since about 2018. It's a Rooikopie deposit. It sits at an elevation of about 115 meters above the current river. Most of the deposit has been made Rooikopie. It has deflated completely. Only the deeper sections here and there is left. Now, if we okay, well, what we're looking at here is the topography. It's the surface elevation with different colors. Obviously, brown again is high, then going into a low, and these are highs. And in this section here, I've superimposed a drilling program done by Transx many years ago that shows the bedrock topography. And when we put the two together, we realized that the bedrock is actually following the lows of the current surface topography. And what we also figured out was that the higher grade sits in these probably old channel features, and it's mimicked by the surface topography. Now, although the grade was fairly low, by mining these higher grade areas, we could, in the end, basically mine out the whole deposit by just blending on a monthly basis. So this was done by just flying it with a drone. And then with that data, we got quite accurate surface topography. And there you can see the channels coming through, and that's what we focus on. And on these deeper features, this is also what the Rooikopie or the Makondos look like. Now, these are all solution cavities in the calcrete that was filled in over time with this deflated gravel, and it consists mainly of banded ironstone and silicates. There you can see how it falls into these solution cavities, and you try and dig them out as best you can, but obviously there's no concentration mechanism, so this doesn't mean that the diamonds would be sitting right at the bottom. Diamonds are distributed all over, and what we generally found that was like we got better grade by just dosing everything together and then selectively taking out the pockets where we have high grade in the upper layers of the Rooikopie. Waterspun is a deposit that we acquired about 6 months ago. It's quite a well-known deposit. It's been mined for about 20 years already by various operators. It's got a grade of about 0.2 CPHT. It's a 20 to 30 meter terrace, so it's a low terrace in this area. But it's still got a lot of tons left. Now, if we look at the bedrock topography, this is once again a DEM showing the bedrock of the old river, brown high, and then these pinks are the lows. So you can see there's a channel coming in over here. There's another channel coming in here, and there's another channel at the bottom here. We only have half of this meander. This part here was mined in 2005, 2006, I think, by another operator, and eventually they gave up. They couldn't make it yet. If you look at the next image, this is magnetics that was flown. Now, we got this data when we bought this property, and we were told that it doesn't make sense, and the magnetics doesn't help. But what we did was, when we superimposed the two, you could see this magnetic high over here and this magnetic high over here. And if you look at the bedrock, you see that they actually split around this island. There's a bedrock high or a small island sitting here. And the one magnetic high goes this way and the other one goes over here. So this island must have had an effect in concentrating. And there you can see a small gorge feature, but it was scour before the gorge. And then as you go out the gorge, typical what you find on a larger scale, there's a bit of a splay, and it looks like it concentrated some of the heavies. And of course, the heavies here would be the banded ironstone, and it should also run with a diamond. So we're busy testing this at the moment to see if our theory is correct. And at this stage, because it's also covered by Rooikopie, we're not sure it does the magnetic actually mimic the Rooikopie. Is there more magnetic material in the Rooikopie, or does it actually go down all the way into the basal? But these are the things that you pick up. But you got to look at everything, and you got to superimpose everything. And if you look carefully, everything makes sense. As I said before, the diamond doesn't occur accidentally in certain places. Diamond is there because it wants to be there, or it's not there also because it doesn't want to be there. Just another example. This is another project that we are mining at the moment. It's called Riet. It's close to Bristow. Bristow sitting over here. You see this tight bend in the river over here. There's the Riet deposit, and the river actually flowed where it's sort of flowing south-north at the moment. At this stage, it was flowing directly from north to south. Now, it was a prospecting right that we also acquired a while ago, and we had to drill and blast 3 areas on this in quick succession because under prospecting right, you're only allowed 3 blasts to test this. Now, this block over here was put out in error on the high of the bedrock. Now, when we started processing this, we started on this corner over here, and we found a nice 28 and an 11 character. And as we moved further down onto this high, the grade just completely disappeared. So in last month, I think we had about 50 or 60 carats at about 100,000 tons treated. But it's just because we're on the wrong area. And that's why you've got to be very careful when you're mining these ultra low grade deposits. If you're in the wrong place, often it's not as if you don't have any grade, it's often close to being barren. And at 50 Rand a ton, it's a very expensive mistake to make. So yeah, you got to be careful. Just to look at some of the diamonds from this area, from the Orange River after conference, this is a 58 character from Kwartelspan. That's a 19 character D flawless polish from it. That's some stones from Bouterspan. That's a 84 carat D. That's a 20 character there. All high value stones. And of course, we actually find quite a few bought on all these deposits. And you always think that you won't find the board gets destroyed. It's not, they get very hard bought, and we still find them. That's a 50 character, by the way. That's 108 D flawless. This stone sold for upwards of $50,000 a carat. Yeah, some more stones. That's 54. They sold upwards of $40,000 a carat. There's some of the bigger ones, 154 character and 196 character. And then John Ward showed us some nice pinks the other day from Cow, and obviously, or most likely, these are also from Cow. This is a 22 carat that we found last year at Kwartelspan, and polished a 10 carat pink. Just to summarize these deposits, Orange River pre-confluence, $4,500 to $7,000 a carat at a very low grade. Riet River, 0.35 at about $2,000 a carat, and in the Vaal River, anything from 0.3 to 1.5 CPST, also at around $2,000 a carat. Just a few comments on processing. You have to mine these things at a large scale. Most of our operations treat between 100 and 200,000 tons per month. You have to do it, otherwise you don't make it, because you're chasing the big stones. We do infield screening, screen as close as possible to the pit to try and keep your costs as low as possible. And then this is the processing. This is Wouterspan plant. Those of you going to the field trip, we're going to have a look at this. And here we have 2 sets of recoveries, 2 Brunelvestic X-ray machines. So you have a double pass. And the previous operator here found probably 50% of his value of his last year found in the second set of machines, because they set up looking at different parameters, and all of them were these big D type stones. Okay, we're very serious about our rehabilitation, because if you don't rehabilitate properly, it's going to be difficult for you to mine in another area again, because people won't allow you, they won't want you to be there. So this is just 3 photographs in sequence from being mined, Roy Copy, to being rehabilitated to a year later. And all of this is because we are using this -6 millimeter fraction as rehabilitation, because the seedbed is preserved. Just looking at the business side of it, this is from the operation I had on the Riet River, just showing how your monthly income fluctuates when you're mining alluvial diamonds. It's not for the faint-hearted. It's up and down all the time. And if you get a couple of months like this, where you just make it and you don't make it in a big way, believe me, the nights become very long. Average size also highly variable. Average value obviously goes very closely related to the average size. You can't predict what it is. You actually only know what your average value and your average size once you finish mining. And then, of course, your grade as well, up and down all the time. We sell all our diamonds through a tender process. COVID has taught us a few very expensive and serious lessons. We've decided at that time that we're going to start our own tender house, and that we are in charge of our diamonds as far as possible down the route as possible. This graph shows on a tender per parcel the difference between the first and the second price only. And there you can see quite significant differences. And often on each parcel you would have 15 to 20 to 30 bids. And this is only the difference between the first and the second. And historically, 20, 25 years ago, they weren't tenders and the guys were just selling out of hand. And I think this is one of the big things that's made the business more profitable in the past 20 years, is that we've been allowed to sell on tender and getting a lot more competition when we sell our diamonds. We've seen during COVID that diamonds being sold in South Africa on tender with being withdrawn and sold a month later overseas, got up to 100% more overseas. And it's not always the case. COVID was an exception, and the buyers weren't traveling, and that's the main reason. But in general, we do get very good prices in South Africa compared to the overseas tenders, and often even better prices, because the buyers like to buy what they call the virgin diamonds, where they know nobody else has looked at it before. Okay, just a bit of a summary.
Okay, summary.
Yeah, I'm nearly finished. In my opinion, and I've looked at all the deposits that I've identified, and even the West Coast, I think we've got more than 100 years of resource left. But they're difficult deposits. The easy ones have been mined. What's left is low grade, or not only low grade, but ultra low grade. You got to watch your costs. You got to be involved all the time, and you need to do your geological modeling and geophysics, and all these things become more and more crucial as you have to be very selective in what you're mining. It remains a high risk commodity to mine, and we need the help of the authorities to make the cost of compliance lower in order to get more people into the alluvial diamond mining business. There's 2 more slides I want to show. Do I have time?
That's fine. I'm just saying there's 20 minutes left, including,
okay,
and
okay.
John and Sanaz is still up to go.
Okay. I just want to comment quickly on just for interest sake, on a deposit. I mean, you probably saw on one of the slides I said there was a terrace at about 240 meters above the river, above the Orange River. This is it. It's called Vaal. You can see right in the distance that Saxon Drift sitting right in the distance. Between this and the next terrace of about 150 meters, there's no other deposits. I mean, we have a 100-meter gap that you can't explain. And this Vaal deposit, there's a photograph of the gravels. It's full of Dlakavu basalt. There's a lot of these probably carnelians, and I think Jürgen Jacob, we had a look at it once, and he said it's probably related to some of the stuff, the older stuff on the west coast. But the problem is, you know, where did the river find these clasts? If we're saying that the Dlakavu was a source of most of our boulders, which it is, of course, but you're 100 meters higher up than your other deposits. It's a bit of an enigma, and I haven't solved it yet, but I'm just putting it here for a few comments from some of the people listening. Okay, that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Lyndon. I think we go straight to John and Sanazo, and then we take questions after that.
Riet, Lyndon's done an amazing job and covered, you know, the alluvial business as of sort of the Vaal and Orange in a fantastic way. So, you know, rather let's get the questions and discussion going. We don't really have much to add. We just be, you know, repeating the stuff. You know, except to say that if people are interested, Sanazo Dlakavu did a really smart summary report of this alluvial diamond section, alluvial diamond business. That report is available. We'll recirculate it to everyone, and it gives you, you know, a very nice overview. And she identified, you know, some of the key challenges which Lyndon has talked to a little, you know, including the sort of one-size-fits-all health and safety requirements, the hugely expensive compliance, taking 4 years to get a mineral right awarded, and, you know, even longer for a water use license. But that's all summarized very nicely in Sanazo's report. But let's open it to the floor.
Thank you, guys. Any questions? I'm amazed to see nothing in the chat box yet. Any questions to Lyndon and company?
Lyndon, you... Sorry, go ahead.
Rivaldo, is Elvis?
Yes, thank you. I suppose I noticed in the image for weekly production, 10 or 20 of the diamonds, obviously like 0.3, 0.4 carats, and then there'll be a single diamond that's 40 carats, which, as you say, is the risk if you don't find it. I suppose my question is, once you've found the prospective site, is there then a way to constrain where the larger diamonds are, or is it just luck when you run into the big one after processing hundreds of thousands of tons?
Look, you, like I tried to show, you have your trap sites. I mean, you by drilling and by modeling, you try and identify the best areas that you are most likely to find grade. Now, with your grade comes your big stones. If your stone count picks up, you know, in a good area, and if you're lucky, you'll find a big stone. But there's no way of predicting where the big stones will be. No. Okay.
Good
there
stuff. Right. But maybe, I mean, there are a couple of questions in the chat box that we can get to. Maybe just talk a little bit about the technology, Lyndon, and your lower cutoff. I mean, you talk about those, you know, extremely high average values, you know, which goes hand in hand with a sort of untraditional, although it's becoming traditional, 4 or 6 millimeter bottom cutoff, and the impact that's had on, you know, not processing sand, saving water, you know, all of those sort of things.
Yeah, like I said, our calculations, because we keep a record of every single stone that we found, and many of them we actually measure as well, X, Y, and Z. We could figure out where our value is. And once we did that, we could say, okay, let's see if we cut it 4 mil or if we cut it 6 mil, what's the most effective way of doing it? And like I said, by cutting at 6 mil, we lost about 60-70% of our stones, but we only lost about 5% of our value. But that fraction is a very huge percentage, like 30 to 35% of your plant feed. So now you're replacing that with a much coarser fraction, and your average size goes from 1.5 to 2 carats, goes to 4 to 5 carats average size. And obviously the value also increases significantly. Now that fraction, like I tried to show you, the -6 millimeter fraction contains your seed bed. So if you screen that out, it makes your rehabilitation a lot more efficient and effective. That's also the fraction that you use to put into your slimes dam. So you're now desanding and you're taking the slimes away. So your slimes dam, instead of being 100 by 100 meters big, is now suddenly 30 by 50 meters. Which is a huge difference. And of course, now we also are recycling our puddle or our dense media which is just mud in our pans. And we're using probably 25% of our water that we used to use. So it made a huge difference. Other things that's changed in the past 20 years is obviously the value of our diamonds have increased. It's become scarcer. The rand dollar has helped us. In that we sell in dollars, and the economies of scale, like you said, we use big bulldozers, use big excavators. It's big operations that we're doing, and the economies of scale have also helped us to get to these bigger stones a lot quicker.
And just to add to that, before we go to the chat box, Lyndon, just a comment, and it goes back to Herman's presentations last week. Statistically, you also use size frequency diagrams to ascertain and monitor your production. It's got to the point where you do that quite regularly. You can also use it to see if you have fingers in the till or you're losing stuff in the plant. So I think the point you've made is that this whole business has become very scientific. And if you use those tools, it's a matrix. You can't use one tool. You use all the tools available, you can make it work. You may have to dip into your wife's housekeeping money once in a while, but generally, if you do it properly, it works well.
Yeah, I know, John, for sure. I mean, the first thing we did 15 years ago was start to do the modeling. I mean, by that time, the easy deposits were gone, and you had to be very selective on what you're mining. So once we got the modeling done and got more people invested into doing modeling, then the geophysics started, the magnetics, and even the drone flying with the drone, getting the topography going. And I think there's probably going to be a couple of new things that will come out over time as well. And of course, the bulk X-ray machines have also helped us. With this banded ironstone, a lot of banded ironstone in the gravels downstream of the confluence. Historically, you couldn't. There's no way of processing that material over, say, a grease table or whatever. There's just no way of doing it. Now with the bulk X-rays, it's just a lot easier to do, and it makes the operations a lot easier.
Lyndon, interestingly, one of the chat box questions in terms of your idea around average rehab costs per hectare. Have you got any idea? Hans, I'll get to you now.
Gert, now look, our viewpoint is that we do rehab. We don't mine, we do rehab. Because to go and do rehab after you've mined is just too expensive on these deposits. So we make sure that our rehab catches up with us all the time, and it's just behind us. So our cost per ton is probably roughly about 50 Rand a ton, and that includes rehab. But I can't give you a figure just for rehab because it's part of our daily production. A truck takes gravel to the pans and brings tailings back and goes immediately into the hole. We try to not do double handling and all those things. So it's not a cost that I can say specifically because it's an integral part of our mining method.
It's a concurrent type of operation. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hans, over to you.
Thank you for the presentation. My question is regarding the processing method you're following, and specifically going from the mining pit to the plant to the sort house, and when you get the odd large stone, which you really chase for. Is the time period from the pit to the sort house and identifying large stones, is it specifically planned for you to be able to pinpoint back to where exactly this large stone comes from? or is that delay too large to really pinpoint where that stone come from, and thereby trying to model for future chasing the large stones?
Look, where we can, when we do our recovery or we do our sorting, we immediately try and put it back, and we actually give every stone a coordinate to try and put it back in roughly in the area where it comes from. But being a low grade and a cost sensitive operation, you do sometimes have to mix quarries just to make sure your plant gets enough gravel. So it is, we try to do it, but we're not always successful, and we're not always as accurate as we would like to be. But having said that, that's for us. I mean, I know most other guys don't do that. But I think one of the reasons that we've been successful is that we are very conscientiously record our data. Every single thing that we do to try and record and try and plot it back on a map to say what we've done at what stage. But it's being done, but it's probably not as accurate as we want to. But having said that, you know when you're in a nice feature, and generally when you're in a nice feature and there's a nice bedrock feature, you know the stones come out. So you generally do have a good feeling for where what comes from.
Right. Thank you, Lyndon. It was just to see whether it still remains a luck when you get the big stone, because that still seems to be the scenario where it's good to have, but it's a luck scenario. It cannot be predicted, even though once you find it, you can say, yeah, that's obvious. It was found at this particular trap site. But forward predicting still seems to be luck of the draw. Yeah, look, how can you predict a 50 carat or 100 carat stone? I mean, it's still a pebble in the river. Yes, it's got a different density, but so does the other diamonds as well. So generally, we find that where your stone count picks up, your chances of finding the bigger stone is better. So statistically, if you look at the population, you should get say a big stone every 1,000 stones should be a big stone. Or above a certain caratage, whatever it is. But to predict it on a gravel basis, it's not possible. It remains a pebble that you know the chances of predicting that is just not possible.
Yeah, it does go back to the size frequency plots though, Lyndon. I mean, if you do a size frequency plot for the Middle Orange River versus the Northwest versus, you know, the Middle Orange between Hopetown and Douglas, you know that if you move this much dirt to 100,000 tons, you should get, statistically, you should get so many stones bigger than 50 or bigger than 100 carats.
Yeah, sure.
Then you've got to move the dirt, yeah.
No, absolutely. But that graph is probably only accurate once you finish mining. You'll mine and you'll say, yes, I'm missing a 100 carat that I should have had, and suddenly one day you'll find 2, and then your stats are correct again. You know, it's yes, it's a tool, but it's also not that accurate.
No, well, that's why you also go back to your tailings. Anyway, Herman had a question, and it goes a little bit to this too, about, you know, how many big diamonds out the Dlakavu, how many out the gravel?
I'm reading it to you, Lyndon. Can you speculate on the percentage of pre-Dlakavu versus post-Dlakavu primary sources for alluvials?
Look, for our area, and I've tried to show that, is that there's definitely different populations for the different river systems. You'll see the Riet River has a different average value, and if you look at the photographs of the diamonds, they're different. The population is different from the Orange River pre-confluence, the population is different from the Orange River post-confluence. So if you had to ask me, I would say that the biggest impact of the Dlakavu is providing clasts in our area. And I don't doubt that there are diamonds in the Dlakavu, but I don't think it contributes a lot of diamonds to our population. It's in any case, if you're looking at what Pierre has shown, I mean, their population is quite a population of quite small diamonds. You know, there's not a lot of big stones coming out of that area. If you say that the Dlakavu brought the pre-Karoo kimberlites, and if you compare to the population that they're mining in Northwest. And many of them maybe will even screen out at 6 millimeters. Because I know in Northwest, you can't really clean out at 6 millimeters because you lose most of your diamonds.
Okay, London, and the last one I see in the chat box is important in the sense that we talked about compliance costs and environmental plans. London, do you have to clean your wastewater before a release or use it in rehab areas?
Look, our process contains no chemicals. The pan that we use as a concentration mechanism is the medium in the pan is actually a mixture of mud at a density of about 1.38. So there's no chemicals used in any of our processes. So we have a small tailings slime dam where this muddy residue goes into. It dries over time, and often we have a second or third dam, and the water in the third dam is clean enough to reprocess and to use again in your process. And from the test, the water samples that we've done, once we've treated the water and it comes out of our slime dam again, it's actually cleaner than the river water.
That's the part I wanted to hear. It is cleaner than what we got out of the river.